What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you some interesting news. As it was reported by PC Gamer and a couple other places that Baldur's Gate 2 may well be getting a remake, and one of the developers behind the original, Kevin Martins, may well be working on said project. Now, by all accounts, this looks to be quite early in development, probably pre-production if anything by the sounds of it. And so whether or not this ever actually materializes is something of a different matter. And usually this is the kind of thing I don't generally enjoy commenting on, simply because, who knows. But in the case of Baldur's Gate, I have a significant amount to say, and my initial reaction to this is actually a bit mixed overall. I'll start with the positive. I certainly see a situation where something like Baldur's Gate 2, which is a very iconic and classic CRPG, could be remade and allows a bunch of people to experience it in a way that is a little more approachable, because both Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 use Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, which is a much, much older edition that most people don't know how to play, and I know something about that personally because I've made many of the videos people watch to learn how to play it, which is one of the many reasons I'm known for covering CRPGs. But while I tend to prefer a more optimistic approach, and so that is where my hope certainly lies, I do think that would be a difficult needle to thread for a variety of different reasons, because in order to make those changes, you would have to significantly change what Baldur's Gate 2 is, to the point that I'm not entirely sure that you'd really have a comparable experience in a meaningful way. And that's kind of what I want to talk about here. So kicking off with what I think is probably the most obvious thing, why jump straight to 2? Why not remake the original Baldur's Gate and start from there? And that's actually even more important here, because whereas Baldur's Gate 3 is much, much farther along, it does connect to the previous two, but not as directly as 1 and 2 do, because 2 is a direct sequel from the original game. So much so that the opening in Irenicus's dungeon can be very confusing if you've never played the original. Now, this is pure speculation, as is most of everything else in this video at this point, but if I were to hazard a guess, it's probably twofold. One, Baldur's Gate 2 is the more popular of the originals. Now, I've always been in the slightly less popular camp of enjoying the first game more. 2 is the one people really loved, though, and so I could see the want to just jump straight to that part. And then the other side of that is Siege of Dragonspear. So if you're going to remake the original game, you have to decide how to deal with Siege of Dragonspear, I would imagine, which was an expansion that came much, much later from Beamdog, back when they were trying to get the rights to make Baldur's Gate 3, as I understand it. But Siege of Dragonspear is, as one would probably expect, a little controversial. In part, what it tries to do is bridge the gap between 1 and 2 a little bit, which it does an okay job of. But there's a lot of complaints about the varying writing quality, and then just having the ability to remake that portion might have contractual stuff with Beamdog we don't know about, or any other number of legal pitfalls that could arise from it, and I could see them just trying to avoid either one of those things, really. That would be my own best guess, anyway. Now, it's probably worth a mention that if you read the articles, they do mention the possibility of remaking both of them. However, it was very much Baldur's Gate 2 that was mentioned specifically, so it's entirely possible they remake the first one as well, I admit. And I guess we'll simply see what happens there. But regardless of what happens in that specific moment, another thing that would have to happen is they're definitely not going to use Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, which was the rule set that those games used, which is a little more complicated than that, but for the sake of this video, that's all you need to know. The catch being that they're obviously going to replace it with Dungeons & Dragons 5.5e, most likely, maybe base 5th edition, but I doubt it, and that comes with a number of challenges and changes in and of itself. So, the original Baldur's Gate 1 and 2 were both real-time with pause, which is a system that has fallen out of vogue. So not only would they switch up the edition for sure, then the question remains, are they going to take it into purely turn-based territory, which if any recent games coming out would be anything to go by, the answer would probably be yes. Real-time with pause has gotten to be very, very rare. Only a couple notable ones in the last couple of years, in fact. So you've got to deal with that before you even start asking the tougher questions, like how that's going to affect things like game balance. And while addition, updates, and changes are not uncommon, you see older like modules and things like that being brought to newer editions of D&D with rule changes and things. That's when you start getting into, again, more complicated stuff, because where Baldur's Gate 2 is an older CRPG, it's not as open as you would probably think of something modern, and as the inevitable comparison would be Baldur's Gate 3. You don't have nearly as many options, and then you have to ask yourself, are they going to update and change all of that content and expand it out in addition to what is already there, which is not an insubstantial amount in and of itself. Then there's the class-specific strongholds and how they may well have to adjust some of those and that content to accommodate the fact that the classes are different. Would they bother updating any of those to accommodate the newer approaches to classes? A good chunk of them would overlap decently well, I think, but there are some that would have to be changed. So long story short, I suppose, is just that you would have to change so much of this game fundamentally, from like the systems it used to the content, the way it approached all of those things, that I have to just kind of sit here and wonder how much would be left of those games with these remakes and new experiences. So, and even then, if you go through and you do all of that, just by the very nature of this game, I still don't think it would be like Baldur's Gate 3. And is that the market of people you're trying to capture with a remake of this nature? And I feel like there's just so much opportunity for things to go sideways here, both in terms of the expectations of what this remake is versus what the expectations of the people who this would appeal to would have, be they people who obviously enjoyed the original, or if they're new players wanting to take a look at them in the form that is not extraordinarily old, as much as I love them. And I just feel like there's so many opportunities for that to just, again, go sideways, because there's going to be so much friction there between what those groups of people want. And as I have certainly noticed alongside many others, when you have conflicts like that, it tends to result in mostly just arguing and not necessarily the success that you may well hope for. But putting all of that together, if this turns out to be happening, or if they've started making the moves behind the scenes to make it happen, I would say this is at best years away regardless. But as I have hopefully laid out in this video, I think there's just tons of pitfalls and changes that would have to be made, and I honestly think this would be a very difficult project to pull off. However, as somebody who loves CRPGs, there is that part of me that hopes they could manage to do it in a way that respects that original game. I've seen stranger things happen, and I will absolutely cover it if anything else is brought up or mentioned or becomes official, etc. But in the meantime, my reaction just to this little initial bit of news is simply good luck. Sounds hard. Hope it goes well if it's true, I suppose. But as for this video, that is pretty much going to do it. Hope you enjoyed said video. If you did, by all means, like, comment, subscribe, all the YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.